kind of call them popcorn fantasy reads. Talking about it, looking at it, it just makes me smile. So many of us loved this book. Unfortunately, I was not one of them. I hope that you're having the most wonderful day of your entire stinking life. Today we're gonna do my February wrap. Then I'm also going to include, at the end, we're gonna do a little bit of bullet journaling because I've been doing my monthly wrap-up spreads in my bullet journal. So I hope you're excited. If you are, please be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, subscribe to my channel. Let's talk about some books. These are going to be in a bit of a random order. If I do have reading vlogs for any of these books, I will include them in the description box down below if you want to check them out. I figure let's just start off and get these out of the way. February, I was finishing my reread of House of Sky and Breath. This was the first time actually finishing it. The first time I read this book, I DNF'd it when I was 70% of the way through. I was so unhappy with this book. It's still my least favorite of the Crescent City trilogy that we have so far. 3 stars. I do have a reading vlog for this one that will be down below. I reread the first book and this one. I did go through and I finished annotating it. There were definitely some moments in this that I liked more than others. I think overall this book was extremely meandering with a lot of the characters. The only thing that really captured me was the ending and the fact that Rune became such a lead role. I love him. I also loved him in To Flame and Shadow, which I also read and finished in February. Rune was my favorite. He really carried me through a lot of this book because the direction that Bryce and Hunt's relationship went in, it just wasn't hitting the same. You know what I mean? So this was 3 stars. While we're at it, let's just finish out Sarah J. Maas. Like I mentioned, I did read House of Flame and Shadow in February as well. I have a reading vlog for this one that is only this book. It does have a spoiler section at the end, but the whole first half of that vlog is spoiler-free thoughts. This was not what I was expecting. I don't think it was what a lot of us were expecting. I ended up giving it 4 stars because at the end of the day, I do like the characters. I think that Bryce is my absolute favorite. I just love her so much. However, I don't think that her romance really compares to Nesta and Cassian or Feyre and Rhys for me. I love her as a character. I love her character arc from where we meet her in the first book to where we end up in this one. But there were some things that definitely I didn't care for. I don't care for all of the characters in the Crescent City books, and I know that in the books to follow, they are going to become more of the focal point. I think we got a really nice conclusion to Bryce and Hunt in this book. I think we also kind of got a conclusion to Rune and his love interest as well, who I absolutely love. There were some ups and downs with this one, but overall 4 star. Let's switch to another 4 star that I had. I listened to the audiobook for Sword Heart by T. Kingfisher, and I absolutely loved this book. This book, talking about it, looking at it, it just makes me smile because I hesitate to call it a cozy fantasy, but it is an extremely character-driven fantasy book. It is more of an adventure fantasy as well because our characters are journeying from place to place. We get to experience them while they are on this adventure together. Basically, our main character is Hala. She's a housekeeper who suddenly inherited her great uncle's estate, and unfortunately his relatives as well. His relatives are extremely peeved, to put it lightly, that she was the receiver of his inheritance. It's a little dark in the beginning. She's like, I have no idea how to get out of these circumstances. Basically, her aunt is trying to force her to remarry her cousin. I wouldn't want to be in that situation either. The only solution that she sees is to unalive herself. So she draws this ancient sword that's mounted on the wall above her bed. She pulls the sword out and all of a sudden, a man appears and she's like, what is happening? Who are you? By the way, I need you to stab me with this sword. He's like, I am now your guard. I cannot kill you with my sword because I am the enchanted sword. His name is Sarkis. He is an immortal swordsman who has been trapped in the prison of enchanted steel. He has to defend his wielder at all costs, like we talked about, and they just start to go on adventures together from there. The dialogue in this book is so witty and hysterical and funny. I was laughing out loud listening to this audiobook. The audiobook is also really, really good as well. I think I found it on Everand. I highly, highly recommend this book. If you were a fan of books like Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater, or kind of like a Margaret Rogerson, Sorcery of Thorns, where the two main characters are kind of at odds with each other, but they have the best banter and dialogue. This is more adult. The two examples that I mentioned are both very YA. This does have some spicy scenes. It's not a focal point, so don't get me wrong, and they are like much, much more towards the end, but you do get spice. It's definitely more adult. Please read this book and tell me all of your thoughts about it. I love it. And then we'll just finish out with the last physical book that I read, and then we'll get into the books that I read on my Kindle. And actually I have another audiobook too. I reread Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff. This is one of my favorite books. I first read it when it first came out. I forget if that was 2 or 3 years ago at this point, but 5-star book the first time, 5-star book the second time. I am obsessed with this writing. I think it's such a unique narrative. If you're unfamiliar with Empire of the Vampire, it has been 27 long years since the last sunrise. For nearly 3 decades, vampires have waged war against humanity, building their eternal empire, even as they tear down our own. Now, only a few tiny sparks of light endure in the sea of darkness. Our main character's name is Gabe. He is what they call a silver saint. He's a member of this like holy brothership dedicated to defending the realm against these vampires. It is dark. Very, very dark. It's emotional. It's a fantasy series that truly paints vampires as the monsters, like heartless monsters that they are. In so many books you see vampires extremely romanticized. This is a dystopian society. If the sun went away and vampires were able to just rule the world, humans become almost like slaves. There's no food left because the sun doesn't shine. It's also told in a very unique way, like I said in the beginning. We're flashing between present time, where Gabe is captured at this point, and he is retelling his story of the past. We learn his whole history from where he grew up to how he became a silver saint, to all of the battles in between, how he became known as one of the greatest silver saints of all time, but also the last remaining silver saint. We'll do the final audiobook that I listened to, The Gathering Dark, an anthology of folk horror by Tori Bovalino, who's the editor, but a lot of authors contributed to this book. Some of these authors I was already familiar with. So for example, Chloe Gong wrote a short story in this, Hannah Witten, Allison Saft. I think those are the ones that I'm most familiar with. But this book was really interesting. I ended up giving it 3 stars overall. I wish that if I hadn't read it in audio form, I would have loved to have gone through and rated each short story individually, because with a short story collection, they're all gonna hit different, you know what I mean? I would say that not all of the stories captured me. There were some that felt very similar to one another. However, there were a couple that really stood out. I loved the Chloe Gong short story. I also loved the first story in the anthology and the last story in the anthology. If these are going in order, Stay by Erica Waters was really good. The Tallest Poppy by Chloe Gong, absolutely loved those two. And then the last one was The Burning One by Shakira Toussaint. Those are the ones that really stand out in my mind. But it's good. It's really short as well. So if you're looking for something that's shorter, that's gonna give you some creepy deeps, it's less than 300 pages. I think overall it was 275, somewhere thereabouts. And the audiobook was actually really good. Carrying on with that horror theme, my 5-star read of February, besides Empire of the Vampire, was The Invocations by Crystal Sutherland. This is the author who wrote House of Hollow, which I also absolutely loved. The Invocations is creepy with incredible characters, and the plot is so interesting. Oh my gosh, I loved this book. It's a YA horror. We follow 3 main girly pops who come from very different backgrounds, but they all kind of end up with their fates intertwined with each other. We have Zara Jones. She believes in magic because the alternative is just too painful to bear, that her sister was murdered by a serial killer and there is precisely nothing she can do to change it. Zara is extremely motivated and in dealing with the death of her sister and her grieving process. She used to be a star student at school. She really turned her focus to the occult because her goal is to resurrect her sister from the dead. Then we have Jude Wolfe. She might be the daughter of a billionaire, but she is also undeniably cursed. After a deal with the demon went horribly wrong, her soul is now slowly turning necrotic. Flowers and insects die in her wake, and monstrous things come out to taunt her at night. She's looking for someone to help her fix this mistake so that she can live a normal life again. Then we have the solution to both Zara and Jude's problems, who is the daughter of a witch. Her name is Emmer. She sells spells to women in desperate situations, willing to sacrifice a part of their soul in exchange for a bit of power, a bit of magic to change their lives. But Emmer has a dark past all her own, and as all of her former clients are murdered one by one, she knows it's followed her all the way to London. It has to do with demons. It's very dark. I think Crystal Sutherland writes such atmospheric books. Even though the scenery in this book changes from multiple different places, you feel like you're in the scene with these characters. The suspense is there. It's so suspenseful, but it's also intertwined with those horrific elements that just make you feel uncomfy in your own skin. Incredible. If you're looking for a book with such a good writing style, I highly recommend. I would also recommend House of Hollow as well. If you end up reading this one and loving it, read House of Hollow too. Next, let's jump to the most unfortunate read of February. This was The Ever King by LJ Andrews. This was our Who Did This To You book club pick for February. So many of us loved this book. Unfortunately, I was not one of them. I ended up giving this book 2.5 stars. What it's supposed to be is a very like Viking inspired fae society, but it very much reads like Pirates of the Caribbean. But you'll notice it in some of the language, and I think in some of the naming conventions for our main fae characters that are not sea folk. It reads, because it's supposed to be very like Viking inspired. So that was a little bit at odds for me. I loved the first 40% of this book, but the last 60% was not for me. It is on Kindle Unlimited, and it definitely gives piratey vibes. If you love a pirate fantasy romance, I think this is a good one. A little bit of synopsis for this book. They stole his crown, so he stole their daughter. For years, Eric, the scarred king of the Ever Kingdom, has thought of nothing but vengeance against the man who killed his father and trapped him beneath the waves, making him a prisoner in his own realm, until his enemy's daughter breaks the chains on the Ever, and Eric makes her the unwitting pawn in his vicious game of revenge. She is innocent, he's vicious. To me, so it does have a captor-captive setup. However, I was under the impression, and this was pitched to me, that it was a dark fantasy romance, definitely leaning on the darker side of things. I entirely disagree with that statement. It's really not dark. Yes, she does get taken captive, but she's not unwilling in any way, and so for me that kind of breaks the dark romance element. I would also, for reference, say that Sea of Ruin by Pam Godwin, which is a pirate, I'm hesitant to call it fantasy because really I just think it's like a historical pirate romance. This is dark. This is unwilling captive. This is so much spice you can't even wrap your head around it. This is perfection. If you're looking for a dark pirate romance, Ever King is just not that. Even if it's slightly unwilling to begin with, it turns willing very, very quickly. My main issue with this book, because like I said, I loved it up until the 40% mark, it's so repetitive. Like, I really think the author just lost the plot after the 40% mark, and the dialogue is really good in the beginning, but they just continue to say the same exact things to each other, and you're like, okay, I loved this when I first heard it and slash read it, but I don't love it for the 80th time. Like, it's kind of lost its impact. I would also say that King Eric, he tries to come off as this like big bad. He is such a soft boy. He's so soft, and like that just didn't work for me as well. And then we're going to end on a strong note. So I read The Damned by Renee Ahdieh. This is the second book in the Beautiful series. I know that when these books were like coming out in publication, there was some mixed feelings about them because of the direction that the author decided to take the series. I'll fill you in with some context in a second if you have no idea what I'm talking about. I really liked it. I feel like because I'm not reading this series as it's being published, as it's coming out, I think they're super, super fun. This series is about vampires in New Orleans. I love it. The first book was definitely giving suspense and almost like thriller vibes, and it is not a heavy fantasy by any means. It's a very light fantasy read. In my reviews of these books, I kind of call them popcorn fantasy reads because the world building is so easy to understand. It world builds as you go, so if that's something that bothers you as a reader, sometimes it does bother me because I'm like, give me everything that I'm supposed to know up front, otherwise I'm going to be confused. This doesn't feel like that because it's such a low fantasy. It takes place in our world. There's so many plot twists. It's just so good. I'm gonna give you the light synopsis for the first book in case you're unfamiliar with the series. In 1872, New Orleans is a city ruled by the dead, but to 17-year-old Celine Rousseau, New Orleans provides her a refuge after she's forced to flee her life as a dressmaker in Paris. Taken in by the sisters of the Ursuline convent, along with 6 other girls, Celine quickly becomes enamored with the vibrant city, from the music to the food to the soirees, and especially to the danger. Soon she becomes embroiled in the city's glitzy underworld known as Le Coeur de Lion after catching the eye of the group's leader, the enigmatic Sebastian Saint Germain. When the body of one of the girls from the convent is found in the lair of Le Coeur de Lion, Celine battles her attraction to him and the suspicions about Sebastian's guilt, along with the shame of her own horrible secret. When more bodies are discovered, each crime more gruesome than the last, Celine and New Orleans become gripped by the terror of a serial killer on the loose. It's not solely vampires. I will just tease that. It's definitely giving magical creatures. These are so fun and so plot twisty. They keep your attention. They're fast paced. They are YA, and it definitely does read YA. I am not mad at it. I think it's absolutely stunning. I love the tension and the angst between Celine and Bastien. He is such a vibe. He's such a vibe. He's such a bad boy, and he actually plays into it so well. I freaking love it. It's so good. It also switches to multiple POVs. There's a lot of mystery and intrigue into some of the POVs that you get as well. I'm having a great time with it. I know that some people have given me feedback like, oh my gosh, I loved the first 2 books. And I'm like, this is a quartet, bestie. What do you mean? What about the 3rd and the 4th book? So that is the wrap up, friends. Like I said, I'm going to do my February bullet journal if you want to stick around for that. But I will say, if you've read any of these books, if you liked any of them, or if you didn't like any of them, please let me know in the comments down below. I would love to chit chat about these. Also, let me know if you would like me to do more wrap ups. I always figure the majority of the time I end up doing reading vlogs for a lot of the books that I read in a month. But if you're someone who likes to have just an all-inclusive reading wrap-up, let me know and I can start to do these more frequently. Hi besties. So to start off, we're just updating some of my, I call them my annual spreads because I fill these out throughout the entire year. So we're starting with my bookshelves, just filling in the last couple books that I didn't put on here yet. And then we're doing my books by month spread. So in January, I read 7 books. In February, I read 9. I just think that this will look really nice as a little graphy poo by the end of the year when these are all filled out, and to be able to see which months I tend to read more in. Then updating my library page. So I had 2 books on here. This is a new spread that I'm trialing this year, and so far I'm really enjoying it because I am such a Libby stan. I basically read most of my audiobooks actually on Libby, and then I try to get a lot of the new release books that I'm not sure if I am going to love, and if I want to actually purchase a physical copy, I will get them on Libby first, and then if I love them, I will purchase a physical copy later. And it's really interesting to see how much money you save, especially on audiobooks. Audiobooks are so expensive. Like, Libby is so clutch. Updating my books hauled spread. The only 2 books that I purchased in February, I'm so proud of myself, was Magnolia Park's Into the Dark and House of Flame and Shadow. I think the only book that I have planned to purchase for March is going to be Empire of the Damned by Jake Kristoff, because we just talked about Empire of the Vampire. It is a need, it's not a want. On my most anticipated book release spread, I obviously update this with my most anticipated releases throughout the year, but I do like to cross off the ones that I ended up reading throughout the year. That way I can look back and see, I don't know, how I did, I guess. So I'm just crossing a couple of these off. I'm updating my trope tracker. One of my favorite tropes is knife to throat, and I just started reading Vows and Ruins by Helen Schurer, and it has such a good knife to throat scene. I had to add it on here. My goal as well, if I haven't done this already, I can't remember, is to also create bookshelves on Goodreads that have some of these tropes too. That way, if you share any of my favorite tropes, we have that collective source to refer to and pull from. I'm updating my book length tracker, that's so hard to say, and then just finishing up my spread for my Crescent City reread. I had all 3 of these books on here, and I just had to fill out the star rating and then highlight the dates that I read House of Flame and Shadow on the little calendars. Then finally getting to my February wrap spread. So my average rating for February was 3.6, which was quite low. There was actually a book that I didn't mention in my February wrapped when we were going through all of the books, which was A Far Wilder Magic. I ended up technically finishing it, or actually like DNFing it, in February. I was waiting to get the audiobook. I was like 80% of the way through, tried the audiobook, still wasn't working for me, but because I read so much of the book, I'm still counting it as read, but it was a 2-star for me, which was very unfortunate. And then we're doing my pie charts, which I do one for genres, and then I do one for star ratings. And that is the February wrapped spread. I hope you enjoyed watching, friends. I will catch you in the comments, and I'll see you in my next one. Toodles!